Assalamu alaikum, Rebecca. Nice to have you here.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Rose. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor to have you on Rahma with Rose, and I'm excited to learn about your spiritual journey along the way. I know you have a very interesting one, and I'm excited for others to hear your story.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to discussing a little bit about it.
Yeah. So before we go any further, could you please tell me about when did you first get interested in spirituality in general in your life, however young you were?
I remember I was about 10 years old, maybe younger, and I was just interested in how to connect to people's minds. When I was
Oh.
about 10, I started to write a little booklet on how to read people's minds.
Hmm.
And even though I didn't know how to do that. So this is one of the reasons I came into Islam, because I had an inherent sense of the spiritual from when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And although my family was nominally Christian, Protestant Christian, we were not particularly religious. I never really learnt much about Christian doctrine. So it was really just a kind of exploration on my own, in my own mind, my own heart for many, many years. Yeah.
Wonderful. Could you tell me more about that? I actually love to probe into people's like if
Yeah.
whatever you're willing to share, like you're writing a book to read people's mind, even though you didn't know how to do that. Tell me more about that. Like what got you into this? What were you reading? Like what were you looking at around you in your world?
Yeah. I don't really know why I got into that. I was just I had a fascination for the spiritual world. When I was a child, we used to live opposite a church, so I used to go to the cemetery and go alone. I went alone into the church because back in those days they used to leave the door open.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very curious about what does the church feel like when there's nobody in there. I used to like to go in there,
Mm-hmm.
nobody in there, just feel what it felt like. And
Mm-hmm.
then I used to go to the cemetery. I used to like to be close to the dead. I had a fascination with the dead. And my mother started to find that a little bit disturbing in me. And but yeah, I wasn't really reading any particular books on spirituality at that time. It was all just a sense of it. And then um, we kind of went to church it was more of a social thing up until I was around 11 or 12. And then we stopped going. My mother stopped going and I stopped going with her. So really heading into my teens, that's when we weren't going to church at all. And I was still sort of interested in spiritual traditions. I guess I was naturally seeking something because I had this sense that there must be teachings on the soul. There must be something that trains you to understand our existence more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what it was, and
Mm-hmm.
I was reading a few books on ancient Egypt and Celtic religion just because that's was what was on the shelf at home. I didn't really pick up the Bible because in a way I had the typical post 1960s modern attitude to the Bible, which was that it's just full of old stories
Mm-hmm.
about hellfire and damnation, and it's oppressive. So I didn't really go near the Bible. And then when I was around 16, I think it was, I was hanging around with a group of friends in my town because I was raised in a small town, and one of them was following a guru, fake guru from India. And this fake guru was teaching some meditation techniques and made this whole big kind of mystery about these meditation techniques, which I later found out from ex followers of this guru. I later found out were very ordinary techniques that you can just get
Mm-hmm.
extremely easily. No mystery about it at all.
This was
But
before the days of Google, though, so it was harder to
yes,
access, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So he came west, and there was no way you could find out anything about where he was getting these
Mhm,
techniques. I mean, for
mhm,
him, he born into a family that was, they were kind of like spiritual guides in their community,
mhm,
and he was the renegade. He kind of broke away and went west and got a whole load of Western followers, as people from India were doing at that time. He's still going to this day. There's a lot of people that have left him. So I was listening to his lectures for a while with my friends. He didn't come personally, but they used to kind of uh, broadcast videos of his lectures at different hotels. So you'd go to a hotel all together in one room, and you listen to, yeah, one of his lectures, and then you talk with each other, and you talk about him, and he became very much the center of everyone's world.
mm,
And then I started to see a few things that I didn't like about the way he treated people,
mm,
and I left. So
mm,
when I was 21, and by that time I'd moved to London,
mm.
and I stopped listening. I kind of made a
Mm.
definitive break because I had
Interesting.
seen how he bullied and controlled people.
Mm. So it
Yeah.
sounds like it was a very dangerous cult, actually, that you're involved with,
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah. What
Yeah.
did you take away from that experience? Anything positive, or mainly just realizing it wasn't a good environment?
I started to understand about techniques of manipulation, psychological
Mm,
manipulation, spiritual manipulation.
mm,
So, because I could see it.
mm,
And he came to Brighton once. So I'd moved to London by this time, and I had friends who were following him in London as well. And he was coming to Brighton for a week or so, and he was having all day session. He could talk till the cows came home. And then so he was speaking in the Brighton Centre, and we all went down from London, and it was a summertime.
mhm,
And I remember sitting in this hall again while he's on stage and he's talking. And there's a woman in front of me with her two little children. They were maybe 8 and 9, and they've got headphones on to have his talking. I don't know where they were from, but they had headphones on to translate what he was saying. And even then, instinctively, I mean, again, I was 2021, but instinctively, I thought, this is wrong. Like your children, because these all day sessions were long, they were tiring, they were taxing. And I just thought it was wrong to take 8 and 9 year olds and make them sit all day listening to this man. And then there came a time where it was one day, it was like, oh, he's going to be giving these techniques, the knowledge techniques, as he called it. And, you can go along to this room and you can ask him for these techniques. So I went along because I wanted the techniques, and I put up my hand and asked him for the techniques. And what he did was he used me as an example in front of the whole room about how not to ask for the techniques and what was wrong with, I mean, now I see now you'd say he was gaslighting. He's just making something up
mhm,
about what is going on in my head and how I'm thinking wrong.
mhm,
And after that experience, I was very, very upset. And then because it was Brighton, after the session, we went down on the beach with my friends just to sit. And I thought to myself, all this guru does is talk about happiness and how to be happy, why you can't be happy, and how if you listen to him, you'll be happy.
mm,
And I thought, but I'm not feeling happy. If anything, I'm feeling the opposite.
mm.
I'm feeling happier not listening to him. So I thought, so there's no point. There's no
Yeah.
point in me listening to him, following him, if I'm feeling unhappier listening to him than listening to him. Yeah. That was a deciding factor.
That's a brilliant use of logic that a lot of people, unfortunately, who enter into cults aren't able to use. So I'm really happy to hear that at the age of 21, you were able to leave that. that space and that control of that guru.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I think it was just Alhamdulillah, like following your instinct. And then I left, and my friends were
Mhm,
like, "Oh, you're making a really big mistake," because what he did, as narcissists do, is he persuaded everybody that it's very, very dangerous. Yeah, very. He persuaded people that if you don't have me,
mhm,
that's it. You're going to be lost in the world. You're going to
mhm.
go down some path. You're just going to be lost in your head. You know,
Yeah,
you're not
I've
going to
heard that
find the
before.
truth.
So,
Right.
yes.
Yeah. And my friends are like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, if you don't have him, it's like, that's it. You're lost.
Yeah.
You're going to fall off the precipice. You're going to fall off the
Yeah.
cliff."
Well, I'm very glad to hear you left, and tell me you left him and you left this, this realm of spiritual protection, so called.
Yeah.
What happened after that when you're free of
After,
that?
yeah. I mean, after that, I was buying a handful of books, still searching. And by that time, I had had my first experience of being in a Muslim country because I was doing my degree in Japanese language and culture. I had been in Japan for 3 months, which I felt was way too secular for me.
Mm,
And again, I didn't have the word secular in my head.
mm,
It was all just experience. It was all,
mhm,
everything for me was experience, not
mhm,
particularly book based, or I didn't have concepts in my mind about, secular society or anything. It was all just going by how you feel about something.
mhm,
And I left Japan and I went to, because I'm very curious about traveling, I went to Malaysia just for 1 week.
mm,
And I felt so different in Malaysia. And I know today it's like just going by feelings is dangerous, but it's kind of how you feel and then processing how you
mhm,
feel. So it's analyzing how you feel, like,
mhm,
why do I feel like this?
mhm,
What's going on? So I went to Malaysia and I just felt like I could breathe. Step by step over time, I realized that in a secular society where where there's no acknowledgement of the spiritual, there's no acknowledgement of the spiritual realms or the afterlife, that's when I feel suffocated.
mm,
Because for me, it's like we've all got to play this game and
mhm,
pretend. For me, because the spiritual world is real to me,
mm,
then being in a society where it's not real, it's like asking someone to pretend that it's not real.
mm,
But let's all play a game where we're pretending that the spiritual realm doesn't exist. So I always felt in a secular society that I'm acting.
mhm,
Let's all just act as if,
mhm,
modern
mhm,
society is real. The whole culture of modern society is where it's at, and it's real, and it's the truth, and it's definitive. And that includes that there isn't any spirituality. And let's all just act in this
mm,
on this stage set and pretend it's real. That's how it was for me.
mm,
So when I moved to that was my first experience of a Muslim country, but I hadn't in my mind thought about converting because I didn't even know that was something you could do in a way. Yeah.
mm,
So after that, I was reading a handful of books, but not really. Again, it's like there's got to be a path, there's got to be a way, there's got to be some teachings, and um, and then I moved in with a young Moroccan woman who was a year older than me, so obviously Muslim from a Muslim background. We became very, very close, and again, instinctively, she was kind of, and then she wanted to study Arabic. I told her that SOAS, they teach Arabic, so she started
mhm,
to study Arabic at SOAS, and then she made friends with people from the Arab world who I became acquainted with. Wasn't
mhm,
that close, but I became acquainted with, and I. This was the age of 21. At the age of 21, we'll say maximum 22. Again, I made a definitive decision, which was that I'm going to cut ties with people that I know in Western society that I have been socializing with. I am going to stop this way of socializing that you do in the West.
mhm,
Because again, it's all utterly superficial to me.
mhm,
And I think to myself, what would happen if I was in trouble? What would happen if I was dying on the street? Would anybody come and ask how I am or help
mhm,
me? And for me, the answer was no. So then it's like, what's the point of hanging around with a bunch
Mhm.
of people who are all pretending to have a good time? And back then it's the early 90s. So it's kind of like, and I was in a fashionable part of London, like West London, where all the models are and the musicians and the actor, people aspiring to be actors and so on. So you've got that extra layer of superficiality, like,
Mhm.
you know, we're all fashionable. We're all where it's at, you know. Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss were hanging around in the area. So like, you know, we're all and but then again, my in my mind is like, but how are we connecting
Mhm.
on a human level? And I just found it lacking. So I cut that at the age of 21, 22, and I kind of gradually moved over to just associating with people from the Arab world,
Hmm.
even though they weren't fully practicing Muslims. But that kind of that started the journey towards Islam.
What
Yeah,
difference did you find socializing with them versus the in the other crowds that you were circulating in?
it's kind of difficult to exactly encapsulate it, but I felt more of a closeness, and obviously I might have had a very different experience if I'd been with a whole bunch of different people from the Middle East. So I'm not saying it's like this sums up the whole of the Middle East,
Yeah.
you know, but it was the, in comparison to British social culture, I found that the way that people socialize from at
Mm.
least that was my experience.
Mhm.
There was more of a sense of family still. I don't know, there was kind of like this natural closeness
Mhm.
and slightly less superficiality.
Mhm.
Maybe that, and I felt that was informed by the culture.
Mhm.
I felt that, you know, Arab culture is still informed by Islam. It carries values from Islam, even if not everybody may be fully
Mhm.
practicing. So that kind of started the move again. I wasn't thinking of converting, but
Mhm.
it's just like, yeah, I just feel I can breathe
Mhm.
around people from the Middle East.
Yeah.
I don't have to, you know. So and then she had her year out in Egypt as part of her degree, and I went out there as well to again think. I was thinking about um I need to have a really good long think about what's important and what I'm going to do with my life and who I am. I guess it's again privileged Western thing to be able to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
Take a year out and just reflect.
Mhm.
But again, you know, in Egypt, again, I'm not saying it's perfect. And I'm sure if I was raised as a woman there, I would have a very different experience. So I do recognize that I was in a position to be able to do that. But at the same time, I just felt I could breathe again in a way I can't in the West. And this was the whole paradox.
Mhm.
And when I came into Islam, it's like that's the paradox. You come into Islam, people from the West, you go back West, and people from the West are, oh, but what about it's so oppressive? And what about the and it's like, well, my phenomenological experience is that I feel I can't breathe in my own free society.
Mhm.
I can't, I like to say, be myself. I can't be real in my own society.
Yeah, that makes
And I
sense.
can I can breathe in a culture or in a society that has, you know, ironically is supposed to be oppressive.
Mhm.
So that was the turning
Interesting.
point.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you said you had a year in Egypt or
Yeah,
Mhm.
um it was about 6, 7 months, I
Mhm.
would say.
Mhm.
About 7 months. Yeah.
Yeah. And what came out
And
of that?
that was my turning point.
Mm.
It was like I want to be Muslim.
Mhm.
Had my first month of Ramadan. That was 1997.
Nothing
And
like Ramadan in Cairo.
yeah,
Nothing like
yeah,
Ramadan.
yeah. You know, and we were in Alexandria at that time, but we went down to Cairo afterwards. But yeah, it was like I loved the way that um, the spiritual world was an integral part of daily life.
Mm.
And it wasn't an issue you know. So because in Britain, I think it's different in the States, but in British post 1960s society, you don't talk about God. God
Mm.
is like, oh, you're a bit crazy. Like you know, ooh, we don't talk about God. That's not cool, you know. So I find it incredibly refreshing to be in a society where people respect religion.
Mhm.
I had not had that experience really.
Mhm.
And you had the Adhan, and and also that Islam still I think helps to cultivate that sense of community,
Mhm.
togetherness, whereas in the West it's hyper individualism,
Mhm.
which then can lead to neurosis. So neurosis and anxiety.
Mhm.
Whereas if you've got this just it's just, you could say, I don't know, it's just part of people's consciousness that we are part, at one level we are
Mm.
one and together. That was, really, really
Mm.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like from your early 20s when you became Muslim in Egypt, you've been also on a long spiritual journey within Islam since then. So how would you describe your spiritual path, and could you tell us more from that time until now in a nutshell,
Yeah.
obviously, more
Yeah.
about that?
I mean, I came back to the UK, and that was it. It was definitive. I mean, it was a fundamental change. I took 2 years to formally convert, but in that time it was literally kind of your previous self, your future self, what am I? Who am I? And then taking that step, it's like, it was very strange. It was like this force that's just like, no, you're
Mm.
coming to Islam and
Mm.
you just have to surrender to it. Some
Mm.
people say, why did you choose Islam? It's like, I didn't choose it.
Mm.
It, you could say I surrendered to it. I surrendered to Islam, but because I recognize it as truth. Yeah. So then came back to the UK, and that was when it was very, very political. Ikhwan Muslimin, very active. Hizb ut-Tahrir,
The Muslim
these kinds.
Brotherhood, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and that wasn't my cup of tea. So I found a Sufi order briefly, but again, because of my experience with this guru, I was hyper skeptical
Mhm.
about committing to any teacher, and I wasn't very content with. They were trying to encourage us to submit to the teacher, and I was like, no, there's a few things I'm not happy with about.
Mm.
So I left that group after about 4 years.
Mhm.
I learned some techniques. Ironically, I learned some meditation techniques with them,
Mm.
but which I still practice time to time. And then I started to teach at Islamic college, which I didn't know was um, the star for Shia. So the Ithna Ashari, 12 Shia. And it was there that I
This
read
is
their
in
pub.
London.
Yeah,
Mhm.
this is in
Okay.
London. Yeah,
Mhm.
I started to teach. So I was doing my doctorate. I started my doctorate, and I
Mhm.
started teaching at the same time. So doctorate
Mm.
part time, teaching part
Mhm.
time, and my doctorate was in Islamic spirituality.
Mm.
So because again, this whole uh, experience of existence that Islam opens up, which you don't have in the West. This is what I
Mhm.
was trying to get into words. That Islam opens up dimensions of existence.
Mm.
It opens up a way of experiencing your existence differently, and you can't know what it is unless you have experienced it or are experiencing
Mhm.
it. And this is why I was banging my head on a brick wall trying to get this across to people. And I recently actually met a woman. She came and studied at Islamic college last semester. I was teaching her, and she's now doing her doctorate at SOAS, and she's now writing on the same thing. We
Amazing.
had, yeah, we had this whole big conversation, and I said to her, I know what you are trying to get across because it's something that you can't see.
Yeah.
You can't see that someone's having a different experience of existence from
Mhm.
someone,
Of
but
course.
it's so different.
Mhm.
Anyhow, so yeah, and then anyway, I was doing my doctorate in spirituality and spiritual dimensions that Islam opens up, and I read some of the publications that the college was publishing that contain narrations from the imams of the Ahlul Bayt, the progeny of the Holy Prophet. And I had naturally always had a respect for the family of the Holy Prophet, even though I didn't know too much about the family of the Holy Prophet. But that was a shift. So I just felt, again, according to my logic, that it just made more sense to go to his family for the teachings,
Mm-hmm.
the spiritual teachings, and that's when I switched schools, you could say, and then that has a whole other that's a whole other landscape of spirituality
Mm.
as well, which some of which has you know, according to my research, that some of it kind of developed into Sufism. So that's why you've got that overlap,
Mm-hmm.
the whole foundation of walaya. And but of course, again, I mean, my primary foundation in Islam is always, how do we experience existence?
Mm-hmm.
What is existence? And how do we experience it? And how do we um, be rooted in reality?
Mm-hmm.
So even within the Shi'i landscape, of course, then you've got all the politics as well. So, and it's because of what is fundamental to me is, how are you as a human being? Islam, whatever school you follow,
Mm-hmm.
Islam is about, how are you as a human being? What is your akhlaq? How
Mm-hmm.
do you treat people?
What is your akhlaq? I'm just gonna translate for
Oh,
people who
sorry,
don't
yeah.
know it. Etiquette or way of behavior, right?
Yeah. What is
Yeah.
your behavior towards other people? What is so the thing that I like about the 12 Shi'i path is that it integrates rationality with spirituality.
Mm.
So oftentimes the Sufi tradition, some of the Sufi tradition then got reintegrated back into
Mm-hmm.
Shi'i culture.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an overlap there as well. But oftentimes Sufism uh, prioritizes direct knowledge of the divine. So it prioritizes this experience, ineffable experience, over the rational.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can't know what Allah is, you can't know
Mm-hmm.
what God is or reality is through rationality. It has to be through direct experience. Um, but the teachings of the imams say that you need to dovetail them to, you need to put them together.
Mm-hmm.
You must also cultivate your
Mm-hmm.
rationality.
Mm-hmm.
And what I feel is that that's what I like about it, because we are thinking beings. Because what this guru did, way back, was he was very anti-thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and he demonized thinking and made it this, don't think. And he said your thoughts are like clouds with a big hook underneath. You have to feel, you have to experience. But what I found was that if you suspend your rationality, that's very dangerous as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're switching off your your processing
Mm-hmm.
faculty,
Mm-hmm.
and almost like negating, oh no, I mustn't think, I mustn't
Mm-hmm.
rationalize, I mustn't weigh things up, analyze, I mustn't do that, because that's getting in the way of my experience of the divine. But the path of Ahlul Bayt says, the path of the family of the Holy Prophet says that you have to cultivate your intelligence, and you have to. It's not enough just to practice. And I would say that people that I know that have focused upon experience over and above rationality, they haven't sought out clarity in terms of their thinking. What I have found is that as the years have gone by, they're still chasing that feeling
Mm-hmm.
of connecting to the divine, but they haven't sorted out their thinking. They're still confused. They're still lost in their thinking.
Tell me
And they
more
say,
about that. Tell me more about that. So, I'm so fascinated by this because in this podcast we talk a lot about the experience of the divine, right?
right,
So, tell me more about the experience versus the thinking of the divine. Like, what do you mean by the difference between these two ways of being, of approaches?
yeah. I mean, we need to have our rationality
Mhm.
because we're living in the material world.
Mhm.
We're not free of the material world until
Mhm.
we leave. So you need to have that rationality
Mhm.
in order to discern, in order to discern whether what you are getting in terms of experience is legitimate or not.
Mhm.
And because, for example, over the years, I have come to feel that the spiritual experience or the spiritual encounter with the divine that people are chasing and
Mhm.
looking for, they have in their mind this beautiful, warm feeling.
Mhm.
Oh, mashallah. And I have this, I just had this great feeling of being connected to God. It's so beautiful. But oftentimes, you can't get away from tragedy. You can't get away from challenges
Mhm.
in life. And most human beings go through very dark periods: devastation, heartbreak,
Mhm.
disappointment, loss, and sometimes feeling stuck and sometimes not feeling close to
Mhm.
Allah. So if we define being connected to Allah as this fana fillah, annihilation in Allah, where, oh, I'm just so ecstatic, and that's kind of like the goal,
Mhm.
we actually set ourselves up for disappointment.
Mhm.
Because even the top theologians and in different traditions have said those who can reach that experience are a handful. It's very, very rare to really experience a real ecstatic encounter with the divine. So if you don't have that experience, does that mean you're lacking
Mhm.
human being or you're failing on the path? And in the meantime, you've got all these stresses piling up in your life.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times you don't feel very spiritual,
Mhm.
or you don't feel what your idea of spiritual is. So what do you do for those barren years when you're in the wasteland?
Yeah, please do share because I'm sure the listeners are curious to hear how different
Yeah.
options and different ways of being.
Um, I I felt that, so something occurred to me, particularly around the time of Muharram, when we are remembering the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. And, I've reflected upon, as you do in Muharram, people delve deep into what happened to Imam Hussein and what it means. And one thing that I came away with was that Imam Hussein confronted malevolence. So his meeting of the armies of Yazid on the plains of Karbala was a meeting of a pure soul, coming together of a pure soul with uh, darkness
Mm.
and corruption and, like I said, malevolence. And he confronted ugliness, everything that is ugly, the ugly underside of humanity.
Mhm.
And so I got from that spirituality is not just this ecstatic experience with the divine, but spirituality is the confrontation with darkness
Mm.
and being able to face that, whether that's in ourselves or in society. And spirituality is actually enduring darkness. And it is having that inner endurance, sabr, um, it is cultivating that inner endurance, going deeper and deeper within ourselves in order to, you could say, locate that place of endurance within us,
Mm.
developing that I realized this is what spirituality is. It's not enough to go down the path of spirituality
Mm.
if you are not equipped to deal with evil.
Mm.
And a lot of people, even in the Shi'i community, who go down the path of irfan, I mean, they call it irfan,
Hmm.
which is very Neoplatonic, has a lot of Neoplatonic influences. And it's
Hmm.
all about, we're seeking the light, we want to escape the darkness, we're seeking the light.
Hmm.
So they go down this path of seeking the light. They are not taught how to confront darkness and how to deal with evil. And I would say that today, in the world we're in, you know, to be an arif, to be someone who has that spiritual knowledge, it's not just about sitting there and like, oh my God, I'm just so spiritual, I'm just so spiritual. It's like
I
you
love the
have
American accent when you do that.
sorry.
It's
I kind of
okay.
slipped into that.
It was a California accent
Oh
too.
my God, I'm just so spiritual. Yeah. So
It was literally like an LA accent.
I'm
So.
really enjoying this. Yeah, like, you know. And that for me, I've become because of seeing the brutality of this world.
Hmm.
It's like how do you be a spiritual person in a world that is full of so much ugliness and brutality?
Hmm.
And I feel that also if you are not equipped to overcome evil, then there's something missing in your spiritual path.
Mm.
You are of no use to anybody if you
Mm.
cannot be someone who knows how to combat evil. So, and again, this is where the intellect comes in, because it's about, in order to combat evil, you have to be able to discern it. The thing what this guru did in my late teens was that he, which is again a very devious psychological trick, was that he undermined people's trust in their own intellect.
Mm.
That's what he cultivated in his teachings. Don't trust yourself, just trust the teacher. And we have a similar thing in Sufism. The teacher
Yes.
knows everything. You don't know. So you put your total trust in the teacher and listen to the teacher.
Mm.
If you have a doubt in the teacher, that's a problem with you.
Yeah.
That's not a problem with the teacher. And for me, that's evil because it's undermining your whole foundation of yourself.
Yeah.
So what I did when I left this guru was that I am going to start to trust my perceptions
Mm.
and my understanding. I'm going to start to trust that. And that's what I've cultivated,
Mm.
for 25 years. You have to develop that ability. Your Imam Ali talks about insight, the absolute imperative, the necessity of having insight. If you don't have insight, you don't have anything.
Mm.
So, and that's a big part of spirituality, having insight. And so that's what I've cultivated over the years. And can make you sound harsh sometimes, but the more you cultivate that insight, the more you go, no, 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 that's not true, or no, no, no,
Mhm.
that's not real, or there's some deception going on here, or
Yeah.
you start to see behind what's going on. It's about not being deceived, not being fooled, not being manipulated, and so
Yeah,
that's all.
this is really profound. Thank you for sharing. As someone who was in a Sufi cult, I would say, and
Yeah,
unfortunately, it took a long time for me to spot the deception. I wish I
right.
had enough critical approach to spotting it, but at this point now, I can relate to you in needing to use our mind as well as our bodies in this process of being discerning, right? Of
Yeah,
trusting our intellect as well as our feelings and emotions, and they go hand in hand. It's
yeah,
really quite profound to think about that your path is how to endure the darkness. That sounds heavy. Tell me more because I'm curious. This world has a lot of darkness, but there's also light. So how do you
yeah,
find moments of joy, of light in a world that has so much ugliness and brutality and violence? Right now, we're witnessing the genocide of
mm.
Palestinians in Gaza. How do you find the light amidst your cultivation of this really amazing resilience?
So what I have found is that I generally don't seek happiness, whatever that may be. But what I do value is peace.
Mm.
And I think that, Islam gives you that, it helps you to be rooted within yourself. So if
Mhm.
you are rooted within yourself, then you have that sense of calm and peace, which I value
Yeah.
hugely. Yeah. And where I get joy is from nature,
Mm.
from, yeah. So this is what is gives me that, you could say, relief. I think
Mhm.
it's a gift from Allah.
Mm.
Human beings make this world a very painful place, but what has been given to us in the natural world, the leaves changing now that we're in autumn, leaves changing color, the birds. Um, Yesterday I was looking at dolphins, picture of two dolphins swimming ahead of a whale, and I'm like, I look at this like, that is incredible.
Mm.
So reflecting upon, what I do is I try to, because Islam also talks about man, or the human being, in the cosmos. So
Mm.
I reflect upon myself as a human being in space,
Mm.
and I love stars at night.
Mm.
So unfortunately, we don't really see them here in London. But if you have the opportunity to go to the desert, or to go somewhere where you can really see the stars at night, and you sit and that's what I mainly do.
Mhm.
I reflect upon myself as this little person, little human being that was brought into existence on planet Earth. We are all earthlings on planet Earth. We've all got our time. 100 years' time, we won't be here.
Mhm.
And, we've all got our story of what's going to happen to us on planet Earth while we're here. And planet Earth is in this solar system, and the solar system is in, and that's what I do. I think about myself as a being in space on this planet, and that we've all got a story.
Mm.
Humankind has a drama that has to play out. And you just go through your life playing out what's been written for you, in a way, and
Mm.
making dua, to making supplication, to try to alter, you can alter your what happens to you through
Mhm.
supplication, so you have that relationship with divine. And that's how I get my peace, by
Mm.
by just remembering that the divine has brought me into existence. I will have my story, everyone will have their story, and that story will come to an end, and we pray for a good exit from here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Moving on to the idea of the healing path, and you might have seen I speak a lot about the spiritual path and the healing path. How do you understand that? And how do you see that going hand in hand with your spiritual journey?
Healing path.
The idea of that they're walking a path, and for a lot of Muslims it is, to jihad and nafs, or
Yeah.
the struggle with the soul. It could be interpreted however each human interprets it. So how do you
Yeah.
interpret the idea
Yeah.
of this?
um I mean, my father left when I was 2 years old, and I stopped seeing him when I was 5. Or he stopped seeing us, me and my brother, when I was 5. My brother was 8. And that for me was always a very, very painful thing. It's um it's very, very, it's devastating not to see your father, and to grow up without a father.
Yeah.
So that was a big, you could say, wound
Yeah.
for myself and for my brother, and for my mother as well. So you're going around carrying kind
Mhm.
of, post traumatic, what now would be recognized
Mhm.
as post traumatic stress symptoms, and that can include self hatred. I've now read, because having read
Mhm.
into it, a lot of the things you go through, you look back and go, oh, that was all post traumatic stuff. I
Mhm.
didn't know at the time. But often self hatred, low self esteem,
Mhm.
anger, and feeling bad for being angry. Like, I'm an ugly, nasty
Mhm.
person because I feel angry. Rage. I'm a nasty, ugly person because I feel rage.
Mhm.
And um, hurt, that hurt that you've been, in your mind, you've been rejected by your parent. I mean, he didn't reject us, but whatever circumstances, he stopped seeing us. And So that was, I suppose you could say, one of the most painful things in my life. And in my 20s, I didn't know what to do with all this rage and anger. And you try to channel it into creativity, creative things, writing, painting. Interestingly, Islam, because the Quran says that we will remove the anger from your heart. And I
Mm.
found that when I came into Islam, this anger and rage had subsided. You know, I had
Mm.
found peace because I guess you're connecting to the transcendent. So these other things that happen in your worldly existence no longer dominate you because you have a higher connection for something, to something else that is above and beyond whatever happens to you in this worldly life. My father also has a personality disorder, and and I hadn't really understood that in my 20s. So I met him when I was 19, and it didn't go well because of his personality disorder. So I had to kind of give up on this idea that I will ever have a relationship with my father,
Mm.
and just lay that to rest. Like, you're never going to have that, and you have to accept it. So that I think that's been something that I've had to learn to heal, and Islam has helped me to heal that in a way, because obviously as you get older, you start to see your parent more as a fallible human being.
Mhm.
You don't expect them to deliver
Mhm.
all of these ideal things that you're looking for. And he did message me a few years ago through Facebook. That was the first message in 25 years. I think it was about 25 years. And messaged me through Facebook and didn't say, didn't say, hello, how are you? He just wrote, when you do your interviews, you have a habit of looking down. To keep the attention of the audience, make sure you look at the interviewer at all times. Look at my
Mm.
videos on YouTube and you will see.
Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been so painful.
Well, the funny thing was, because I thought, this is so off, out in some planet, like he's really off on some planet. Like,
Yeah.
it didn't hurt. I I felt sorry for him
Mm.
because I thought, this is coming from someone who's detached from reality. You've
Mhm.
got to be detached from reality if that's what you're saying after 25 years.
To your daughter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, what am I going to reply? So I thought about it for about 3 days. Imam Ali, he always says, well, he doesn't. Imam Ali says in one narration, he says that it is good to reflect. If you want to reply to somebody about something, reflect on it for about 3 days
Mhm.
before you reply. I reflected on it. So I thought, I wrote back and I said, thank you for the tip.
That's all.
Yeah.
And did he respond?
And he did one of those blue thumbs up,
Oh dear.
and that was it.
Yeah.
That is our total communication in 25 years.
Mm.
And I think I heard from my grandmother, because I'm in touch with my grandmother now, his mother. She said, oh, he was so happy when you replied to him, and he's hoping I'm going to go back and reconnect. But I know I can't because
Mm.
of his personality disorder.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So, and part of that disorder means that he's in this fantasy world and he makes things up.
Mhm.
So when you have a conversation with him, you're not talking to him. You're talking to a personality that he has invented.
Mm.
And he's telling you things that he's made up, that he's expecting you to believe.
Yeah.
So it's like, I can't have a relationship with someone who's in a fantasy world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Thank
see him
you.
as,
Mm. Yeah.
yeah, and but I noticed then that's like what I think Islam does, and I said this to people in a couple of talks. Sometimes you don't feel the benefits of Islam all the time,
Mhm.
but what I've noticed is you notice the benefits at crisis times or at
Mm.
crunch times. And all of that training, reflection, dhikr, salah, discussion on Allah, discussion on
Mhm.
ourselves, um, that kicks in when it has to.
Mm.
And then, oh, wow, all of this training, all of this self analysis and practice and fasting and whatever. Um, now I'm seeing the benefits because it hasn't shaken me.
Mm.
If I'd been in my 20s prior to Islam and he's written to me like that, I would have been devastated and I
Mm.
would have been really thrown off kilter for months.
Mm.
And I would have been angry and upset and not known how to react.
Mm.
But this time it's like, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So,
That's perfect. Thank you. You just answered the question I was going to ask, which was you keep on saying Islam does this, it's helped me. And I was like, how does it do? And I think you just answered the question in
right.
saying and sharing that all the years of the work, quote unquote, all the things you mentioned helps you come to a point when you deal with difficult people, difficult situations, you can get through it,
Yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think those tools are instilled within us,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes without you realizing. So one of the things that attracted me when I came into Islam was seeing the resilience of Muslims. I don't like that word because the British government's using it at the moment.
Oh dear.
um, yeah, so everyone's got their resilience projects at the moment because then they get funding from the government. But anyway, so but I did notice with the Muslims that I met
Mm.
way back when I was coming into Islam, they've got this resilience and calmness in how they deal with huge challenges.
Mm.
And I want that. I
Mm.
want to be like that. And I think that after all of this time, not saying I'm perfect, I've still got reflection to do and work to do. And I'm not saying I'm always calm when
Mm.
something comes up, but I would say that there have been occasions where there's been a challenge, and without even thinking consciously about it, all that training just
Mm-hmm.
kicks into action,
Mm.
and you handle the situation almost kind of spontaneously
Mm-hmm.
because you've done all that training, and the
Mm.
training kicks in.
That's so
Yeah.
interesting. So, question for you, because you're also, I would say, a scholar of Islam and in the Shia community and a spiritual leader. So, I'm sure that people come to you and they talk about their struggles, their difficulties praying, their difficulties doing the work. What do you tell people who talk about the difficulties doing the work? Because it sounds like this work is what gets us to the place of that we're all longing for, the healing, the spiritual path. And I also work with so many women who also struggle in the same way. So tell us, how do you respond to these people? How do you help people and guide them to do the work?
I always try to be real, um, and because I feel that a lot of the difficulties that people have, that Muslims have, arise from the fact that they have been given a narrative of Islam that somehow clashes with the reality they are experiencing.
Hmm.
So they're saying that, well, I'm experiencing really bad things or difficult things or challenges, and it's making it difficult for me to practice Islam. Therefore, I feel like I'm a bad person,
Hmm.
and everyone's trying to encourage me to be on the path and coerce me to be on the path, but I can't because I haven't got an answer to
Hmm.
this these issues. So I suppose you could say validate their issues,
Hmm.
and sometimes they are sent to me by their parents, even though they're in their 20s. Can you fix my daughter? And um, oftentimes I will say to the young woman, most of the time it's young women, I will say that what you are experiencing is true and valid. And maybe the reason why you feel you can't be a good Muslim is because of the idea of Islam that you are being expected to fulfill. And that idea of Islam doesn't work in our society. So it's an ideal,
Mm,
but it's not addressing the reality that's in front of you.
mhm,
So I just try to be real with them. And I just try to say, yeah, it's understandable that XYZ is happening to you or has happened to you, because this is what this life is about. This is what existence is about. If that's making you question Islam, what can Islam do for you? Then that's good. Let's look at that and let's start to think and analyze, because that's what Islam is
mm,
about. It's not just about, I have to live up to this ideal, but it's about, let me think about this. Let me analyze it. Let me step by step work it out. Just because I'm questioning doesn't mean I'm out of the fold of Islam, doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And so that's what I try to do.
yeah. I must say your students, your community are really lucky to have someone like you who can give them a reality check, right? Because often so many leaders will just guilt people into saying the problem isn't Islam, the problem is you. You're not fulfilling your duties, therefore you
Yeah,
are a bad Muslim, right? And I love the fact they're saying our modern reality is difficult. And it makes sense why Muslims are struggling to carry out their ritual practices, why they're
yeah,
struggling to keep within the boundaries of Islamic behavior.
yeah,
Right? It makes sense.
yeah,
So I really appreciate that you just give them a reality check and speak the truth because a lot of Muslim scholars and leaders are not doing that. And I think they're harming people more than they are helping them.
yeah, definitely. Oh, yes.
So
The guilt tripping is awful.
yeah.
And so yeah, and I say to youth, I say to young people, when I talk to young people, I say to them, the rules of Islam are strict. They are tough. They are not easy. But have a think about where you might be if they weren't there.
Mm,
I have contemporaries, people that I went to school with, who are dead now
mm,
because of drink and drugs, and they just got lost because they had
mm,
absolutely zero guidance on anything. They grew up with nothing, and they got lost in their minds. Some have been, sectioned. They got lost in their minds. They go down certain spiritual paths, get totally lost mentally, never come out of that. So I that's what I say to them, that if you don't have those rigorous guidelines, then you can um, go down a self-destructive path.
mm.
But I'm not. I say to the youth, I'm not saying it's easy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you. It's
try and
important.
encourage them, and I try to say, well done, rather than guilt trip a woman for not wearing hijab.
Yeah.
For those who are wearing hijab, I say, well done for wearing hijab.
Yeah.
So,
This is why we need more women in positions of authority and leadership to give this compassion and realness to people, and not be on the pedestal. Like I love you to speak to them from where they are at their level. I mean, this
yeah,
is the sunnah of the Prophet and of Ali, and just to speak to people
yeah.
where they're at. So really
Let's deal with
beautiful.
you
Yeah,
where you are at.
exactly. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, Rebecca, this has been such a really deep and provocative and kind of thought enriching conversation. Do you have any pearls of wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners, to leave us with?
I don't feel very wise, but pearls of wisdom. Um, well, I would just say work on trusting your intuition
Mm,
and trusting your rationality,
mm,
and using those together and building that trust within yourself, that trust in your perception of things and your understanding of
mm.
things. Yeah.
That's so important. Thank you so much for being on Rahma with Rose. It's been a true pleasure to have you on today.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a great discussion, and thank you for the questions too.
Thanks.